Command, this is Alpha Team. Requesting immediate support.
Over.
The story of the Navajo Code Talkers is one of those incredible chapters of history that almost feels like it was pulled straight from a movie script. During World War II, when the Allies were struggling to keep their communications secret from the Axis powers, an unlikely solution emerged from the deserts of the American Southwest. It wasn't a new machine or some complicated cipher. It was a Native American language, spoken fluently by only a select group of people. This twist of fate would change the course of the war and highlight the unique contributions of the Navajo people. When Japan struck Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States suddenly found itself in desperate need of a reliable communication system. Military messages were constantly being intercepted, and even the most advanced codes of the time were vulnerable to being cracked. The Marines in particular were suffering heavy losses because their transmissions could be decoded. That's when a man named Philip Johnston, the son of a missionary who grew up among the Navajo, stepped forward with a bold idea. He suggested that the Navajo language itself could serve as an unbreakable code. The beauty of the Navajo language was in its complexity. It wasn't a written language in the traditional sense, and its structure was vastly different from English or other European tongues. On top of that, very few people outside of the Navajo Nation could speak or even recognize it. Imagine trying to crack a code when you don't even know where the words begin or end. That's the kind of puzzle enemy cryptographers would be facing. This natural barrier gave it an edge that no machine cipher could compete with. The Marines decided to give Johnston's idea a try, and soon the first group of Navajo men were recruited. They weren't your typical soldiers. Many of them had grown up in remote areas, tending sheep or helping their families in the rugged landscapes of Arizona and New Mexico. Yet within weeks, these young men were being trained in military procedures and tasked with creating a code that could be used instantly on the battlefield. Their mission was secret, and even their families often had no idea what they were doing. At first, the code wasn't just straight Navajo. Instead, the Code Talkers created a special system using their language. Words in Navajo were assigned to represent military terms, weapons, and even entire tactical maneuvers. For example, the word for turtle might represent a tank, while ironfish could mean a submarine. This way, even if someone happened to understand Navajo, they still wouldn't know what the message meant without being trained in the code. It was a double layer of secrecy. The first major test of the Navajo Code Talkers came in 1942 during the Battle of Guadalcanal. Messages that once took hours to encode and decode were now being transmitted in minutes. On the battlefield, seconds could mean the difference between victory and disaster. And the Code Talkers gave the Marines a huge advantage. Commanders quickly realized they had stumbled upon something revolutionary. Imagine being a Japanese cryptographer at the time. You've cracked every type of code the Allies had thrown at you so far. But now you're listening to a language that sounds unlike anything you've ever studied. It's not German, it's not English, it's not even a recognizable form of phonetics. It's something entirely alien. The frustration must have been unbearable. They could intercept messages all day long, but without the key, they were nothing but strings of strange sounds. As the war raged on, the number of Navajo Code Talkers grew. By the end of the conflict, around 400 Navajo men had served in this top-secret role. They were scattered across the Pacific, from Iwo Jima to Okinawa, relaying critical messages under fire. Their work wasn't glamorous. Many times they sat crouched in foxholes with radios, whispering codes while shells exploded around them. Yet their calm voices carried instructions that guided airstrikes, coordinated troop movements, and saved countless lives. One of the most famous moments highlighting their importance came during the Battle of Iwo Jima in 1945. The fighting was brutal, and communications were key to survival. 6 Navajo Code Talkers worked tirelessly over the course of the battle, sending and receiving hundreds of messages. Every single one of those transmissions was accurate. Not a single mistake was recorded. The commanding general later declared that the Marines could not have taken Iwo Jima without them. Despite their incredible contributions, the Code Talkers' work remained classified for decades after the war. This secrecy meant that when they returned home, they couldn't even explain to their families what they had done. Many of them went back to herding sheep, farming, or working in small towns, carrying the weight of a secret history that would only come to light much later. It wasn't until 1968 that the program was declassified, and their story began to emerge. By then, many of the Code Talkers had aged, and some had already passed away. But the recognition they finally received brought their names into the spotlight and reminded the world of the unique role they played in defeating the Axis powers. The Navajo Code Talkers didn't just help win battles, they also showed how cultural heritage could become a weapon in times of crisis. The very language that had once been suppressed in schools, where Native children were punished for speaking it, became a tool that saved American lives. This twist of history is both inspiring and heartbreaking, highlighting the resilience of the Navajo people. When the Code Talkers eventually received medals and honors from Congress in the early 2000s, it was a moment of long overdue recognition. Surviving Code Talkers stood proudly, some wearing traditional clothing alongside their military uniforms, representing both their heritage and their service. They had carried a burden of silence for so long, and now they were being celebrated as heroes. Their story also sparked a renewed interest in preserving indigenous languages. People began to see that these languages weren't just cultural treasures, they were living tools of resilience, identity, and even national security. For younger generations of Navajo, the legacy of the Code Talkers became a source of pride, a reminder that their language held power on the world stage. Hollywood eventually tried to capture their story. With films like Wind Talkers, though, many Navajo felt that no movie could truly represent the reality of their sacrifices. The truth was often quieter, less cinematic, but far more profound. The Code Talkers didn't see themselves as heroes, they were just doing their duty, protecting their fellow soldiers with the one thing only they could provide: their voice. Even today, the Navajo Code remains the only unbroken code in modern military history. That fact alone is astonishing. At a time when machines and mathematicians were racing to outsmart one another, the ultimate answer lay in an ancient language passed down through generations. It shows that sometimes the most powerful tools aren't invented, they're inherited. Tourists who visit the Navajo Nation today will often find memorials and museums dedicated to these men. Their names are carved into plaques, their faces remembered in photographs, and their voices preserved in recordings. These sites serve as a bridge between past and present, reminding us that history isn't just about great generals or famous battles. It's also about ordinary people who rose to extraordinary challenges. For the Navajo community, the Code Talkers are more than war heroes. They're symbols of survival. They represent a time when their culture, often marginalized, became a lifeline for a nation that had overlooked them. That irony isn't lost on anyone, but it also makes their story all the more powerful. They turned what was once seen as a weakness into an unshakable strength. The story of the Navajo Code Talkers continues to inspire new generations worldwide. In classrooms, students learn how language can be more than words. It can be history, it can be identity, and sometimes it can even be the key to victory in war. For veterans, their story is a reminder of the quiet sacrifices that win wars. And for the world, it's proof that diversity isn't just valuable, it can be vital. In the end, the Navajo Code Talkers didn't just confound the Axis powers. They left behind a legacy that bridged cultures, honored traditions, and proved that in the darkest moments of history, even the most unexpected voices can rise to shape the outcome of the world. Their story is not just American history, it's human history. Life for the Navajo Code Talkers wasn't easy, both on and off the battlefield. Imagine being a young man pulled from your community in the desert and suddenly dropped into the chaos of the Pacific War Zone. Many had never even left the reservation before enlisting, and now they were surrounded by explosions, unfamiliar food, and the constant fear of enemy attack. Yet through it all, they carried their radios and their voices like weapons, delivering messages that could change the tide of a battle. Training for the Code Talkers was intense. They not only had to memorize the special code words, but also keep up with military drills and discipline. A mistake on a radio transmission could cost lives, so accuracy was everything. The code wasn't written down, it had to be learned by heart. That meant hundreds of terms memorized, from planes to battleships to weapons, all hidden under Navajo words that sounded like nothing the enemy could ever hope to understand. What's remarkable is how quickly the Navajo recruits adapted. Within just a few weeks, they were creating and practicing the code. Their intelligence and memory skills astonished the Marines. In fact, during tests, They could send and decode messages far faster than standard encryption machines. Officers who doubted the idea at first quickly became some of the biggest supporters once they saw the results in action. One of the clever aspects of the Navajo Code was how it used everyday images from nature to describe modern warfare. Airplanes were called birds, bombs became eggs, and destroyers were sharks. To an outsider, it might have sounded like nonsense. Why talk about turtles and eagles in the middle of combat? But for the Code Talkers, it was a way to disguise deadly serious instructions under the cover of ordinary language. As battles grew more intense, the Code Talkers proved their worth over and over again. At Tarawa, Saipan, and Guam, their voices cut through the chaos, guiding airstrikes and calling reinforcements. In one instance, a Code Talker transmitted a message that helped Marines coordinate artillery fire within minutes, saving a company that was about to be overrun. These small, unseen victories stacked up into huge advantages. Even with their importance, the Code Talkers still faced prejudice. Many Navajo men had grown up in a world where Native Americans were often treated as outsiders in their own country. Some had been forced into boarding schools that tried to erase their language. And yet here they were, using that same language to help save the very nation that once tried to silence them. The irony was heavy, but it also gave them a deep sense of purpose. On the battlefield, the Code Talkers earned the respect of their fellow Marines. Soldiers knew that without these radio operators, their chances of survival dropped dramatically. Many Marines would later say that they trusted the Code Talkers more than any machine. Their calm under fire and quick thinking made them reliable when chaos was everywhere. Another fascinating part of their work was secrecy. The Code Talkers were constantly reminded that they could never discuss what they were doing. Some even had to guard their own radios with rifles, making sure no enemy soldier could capture their equipment. The secrecy extended long after the war, leaving families in the dark about the heroic deeds of their sons, brothers, and husbands. For many of the Code Talkers, the war was a turning point in their lives. They had grown up in small communities, sometimes without running water or electricity, and suddenly they were thrust into the global stage of history. When they came home, they carried stories of faraway islands and distant seas that few in their communities could imagine. But returning home wasn't always easy. Veterans often found themselves struggling to fit back into civilian life. Jobs were scarce, and many faced the same discrimination they had known before the war. The recognition they deserved didn't come quickly, and that left scars. Yet despite the hardships, most of them carried themselves with quiet dignity, never boasting about their role in one of history's greatest wars. The declassification of the Code Talker program in 1968 marked the beginning of their long journey toward recognition. Suddenly, what had been a silent sacrifice was now a celebrated story. Historians and journalists rushed to interview surviving Code Talkers, piecing together a narrative that had been hidden for decades. The world was astonished to learn that the only unbroken code of World War II came not from a machine, but from a native language. School children began to learn about the Code Talkers in history books, and their names were finally placed alongside the great heroes of the war. Yet many Navajo families felt bittersweet about this recognition. It was welcome, but late. The men who had given their youth to the cause were now elders, and some had already passed away before ever being thanked. When honors finally came, they came with grandeur. In 2001, President George W. Bush awarded the original 29 Navajo Code Talkers Congressional Gold Medals. It was an emotional moment as frail veterans stood proudly in Washington, D.C., wearing both their Marine uniforms and their cultural regalia. The applause was thunderous, a sound that echoed the gratitude of a nation. Even after receiving recognition, the Code Talkers never forgot their roots. Many spoke about how their traditional upbringing had given them the strength to endure the hardships of war. Their connection to the land, their families, and their language gave them a foundation that no military training could provide. In this way, they carried both Navajo tradition and American duty together, side by side. The impact of the Code Talkers went beyond the war. Their story inspired Native youth to take pride in their culture and language, which had often been dismissed or suppressed. Language preservation programs began to grow stronger, with elders teaching Navajo to younger generations, ensuring it would never be lost. The Code Talkers' legacy became not just about winning battles, but about protecting identity. The symbolism of their contribution is powerful. A language once viewed as primitive by outsiders became the most advanced code in modern warfare. This reversal of perspective forced many Americans to rethink how they valued native culture. It was no longer something to be hidden, it was something to be celebrated. Tourists visiting the Navajo Nation often hear stories of the Code Talkers, and many gift shops sell memorabilia honoring them. But for the Navajo themselves, the memory is more personal. These men weren't just war heroes. They were fathers, uncles, and community members who carried a great responsibility in silence. Their sacrifice is woven into family histories passed down through stories around kitchen tables. Their influence also reached pop culture in unexpected ways. From documentaries to novels, their story has become a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. For many Americans, it's a reminder that some of the greatest contributions to the country have come from communities that were often overlooked or marginalized. The Code Talkers proved that patriotism comes in many forms, and sometimes from the most unexpected places. Today, the Navajo Code Talkers are honored in ceremonies across the United States. Each year, veterans groups and Native organizations gather to pay tribute to their service. Their names are spoken, their photos displayed, and their courage remembered. For the Navajo Nation, it's a way of keeping their legacy alive, not just in history books, but in living memory. The lesson of the Code Talkers endures, that diversity is not a weakness, but a strength. In the darkest days of World War II, it was the unique voice of the Navajo people that gave hope and clarity. Their story is a reminder that sometimes the key to solving the biggest problems lies in honoring the differences that make us human. The Navajo Code Talkers were not the only Native Americans to serve in World War II, but their role was truly unique. While thousands of Native men and women joined the armed forces as soldiers, nurses, and workers, the Code Talkers carried a mission that no one else could fulfill. They weren't just fighting with guns or tools, they were fighting with words, turning language into a weapon that the enemy could never defeat. When we think about war, we often picture tanks, planes, and battleships. But communication is just as important as firepower. Without clear communication, even the strongest army can fall into chaos. That's why the Navajo Code Talkers were so vital. They gave commanders the ability to act quickly and with precision, turning what could have been confusion into organized action. The Japanese military was known for its skill in code breaking. They had some of the best cryptographers in the world, and they regularly broke Allied codes. Yet when it came to the Navajo language, they were completely stumped. No matter how many transmissions they intercepted, no breakthrough ever came. The Navajo language was their wall, and it held firm until the end of the war. Interestingly, some Japanese scholars had actually studied Native American languages before the war, but not Navajo. That small twist of fate meant the Code Talkers' words remained an unsolvable puzzle. Had it been any other language, perhaps the outcome would have been different. But with Navajo, the Axis had no chance. Life on the front lines was dangerous for the Code Talkers. Carrying radios made them targets, and in the confusion of battle, sometimes even their own comrades mistook them for enemy soldiers. To prevent tragic mistakes, some Code Talkers were assigned bodyguards to protect them. These guards knew just how valuable their Navajo partners were without them. The mission could fail. The resilience of the Code Talkers was astonishing. Many had grown up in harsh desert conditions, used to long days of herding sheep or farming in tough environments. This upbringing gave them physical endurance and mental toughness that served them well in war. Even when food was scarce and sleep was impossible, they kept transmitting, their voices steady amidst the noise of gunfire. Some of the Code Talkers were only teenagers when they joined. Imagine being 17 or 18 years old, leaving home for the first time, and suddenly carrying the responsibility of national security on your shoulders. They didn't have years of schooling in cryptography or advanced technology. They had something much deeper, their cultural heritage and their quick minds. During the war, the Code Talkers never saw themselves as special. Most of them believed they were simply doing their duty, like any other Marine, but their comrades knew differently. Soldiers who fought alongside them often described the Code Talkers with deep admiration, calling them the reason so many missions succeeded. After the war ended in 1945, many of the Code Talkers went home quietly. They didn't march in parades or give interviews. Because of the secrecy surrounding their work, they often blended back into everyday life as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, they carried memories of battles, of friends lost, and of the heavy responsibility they had borne. For decades, the world overlooked their story. History books often skipped over Native American contributions, focusing instead on generals and politicians. But within Navajo families, the elders remembered. They knew that their sons had played a role far larger than anyone could imagine. They kept the memory alive until the day the truth was finally revealed. When recognition did come, it was emotional. Imagine waiting over 20 years to be able to tell your family what you had done, only to finally see your story honored by the entire nation. Many code talkers spoke about feeling both pride and sadness, pride in what they had accomplished, and sadness that so many of their brothers didn't live long enough to be honored with them. The code talker's story also sparked a wave of interest in Native American history more broadly. People began asking questions about other indigenous contributions, traditions, and cultures that had been hidden or suppressed. In this way, their legacy stretched far beyond the battlefield, became part of a movement to recognize and respect indigenous voices. One of the lessons their story teaches us is the value of preserving language. At one point, many schools tried to erase Navajo by punishing children for speaking it. If those efforts had succeeded, the U.S. might never have had this unbreakable code. The very survival of the language is what made victory possible. That's a powerful reminder of how important cultural preservation can be. The code talkers' work also influenced modern cryptography. Military experts studied how the Navajo system was built. And while no new codes were made using languages in the same way, it showed that innovation doesn't always come from technology. Sometimes the answer lies in human creativity and cultural knowledge. For the Navajo Nation, the Code Talkers are not just a piece of American military history, they are family. Every year, communities gather to honor their memory, holding ceremonies that blend both traditional Navajo practices and military traditions. This mix reflects exactly who the Code Talkers were: proud Navajo men who also served as proud U.S. Marines. Stories of the Code Talkers have even reached international audiences. Visitors from around the world come to the United States to learn about them, fascinated by the idea of a code so perfect it could never be broken. In a globalized world, their story resonates as an example of how cultural diversity can hold incredible strength. Even though fewer and fewer code talkers are alive today, their legacy continues through museums, documentaries, and education programs. Young people, both Navajo and non-Navajo, grow up learning that sometimes the smallest communities can make the biggest difference. It's a lesson that inspires across generations. The Navajo Code Talkers showed that courage isn't always about charging into battle with a weapon. Sometimes courage means sitting still under fire, focusing on a radio, and trusting that your words will reach the right people in time. They fought not just with their hands, but with their minds and their voices. Their contribution is a reminder that history is never just about the powerful or the famous. It's about ordinary people placed in extraordinary situations, rising to the challenge. The Navajo Code Talkers were not kings, generals, or presidents. They were farmers, shepherds, and students. Yet in their hands, history shifted. In the grand story of World War II, the Navajo Code Talkers occupy a special place. They represent both the pain and the pride of Native American history. They remind us that even in times of war, humanity's greatest strength often lies not in machines, but in culture, memory, and identity. And above all, they remind us that every voice has power, sometimes enough power to change the world. The memory of the Navajo Code Talkers often sparks an important question. What if Philip Johnston had never suggested the idea? The war might have gone very differently. Allied forces could have continued losing critical information to enemy cryptographers, leading to disastrous outcomes in key battles. It's fascinating to think how one idea, born from familiarity with a culture and its language, could reshape the entire Pacific theater. While the Navajo language was the most famous, other Native American languages were also used in smaller ways during the war. Choctaw, Comanche, and Cherokee soldiers created codes of their own, though not on the same massive scale. This shows that indigenous knowledge played a much broader role in U.S. military success than many people realize. The Navajo, however, stood out because of how extensive and unbreakable their code was. The original group of 29 Navajo Code Talkers are often remembered as the pioneers. They were the ones who designed the code itself, creating the foundation for others to follow. Their innovation turned the Navajo language into a battlefield tool, proving that culture and creativity could outwit even the most advanced enemy. Without their groundwork, the system could never have expanded to hundreds of code talkers later in the war. One of the most impressive facts is how the code could evolve. If new weapons or tactics emerged, the code talkers quickly created fresh terms to match. The code was alive, adapting as the war unfolded. This flexibility made it nearly impossible for the enemy to keep up, even if they somehow managed to catch hints of its structure. Imagine the pressure these young men felt. In the middle of battle, under heavy fire, they had to stay calm and translate instantly between Navajo and English without making a single mistake. A slip of the tongue could lead to bombs landing on the wrong spot or reinforcements arriving too late. Yet incredibly, the accuracy rate was near perfect. That level of responsibility is hard to comprehend. Many veterans later said the code talkers gave them peace of mind. Soldiers felt safer knowing that their messages were secure, that the enemy couldn't predict their moves. This confidence boosted morale, which was just as important as any weapon. In war, belief in your chances can be the difference between pushing forward or breaking apart. But the code talkers' service didn't erase the struggles they faced as Native Americans. Even after the war, when their secret mission was revealed, many still encountered discrimination. It was a painful contradiction. They had helped save the nation, but the nation didn't always treat them with respect. This reality makes their loyalty and bravery all the more remarkable. Some code talkers spoke about how their cultural values guided them in war. Navajo traditions emphasize community, responsibility, and harmony. These principles helped them remain steady under the extreme stress of combat. They weren't just fighting for America, they were also fighting for their people, carrying the strength of their ancestors with them into battle. The Navajo language itself is deeply connected to the natural world. Many of the code words were drawn from animals, landscapes, and elements. This connection made the code not only functional, but also meaningful. It reflected a worldview where even in the harshest of human conflicts, the natural world was still present in their voices. During the war, some code talkers carried small items of cultural or spiritual significance with them, like medicine pouches or tokens blessed by family members. These gave them comfort in dangerous moments, reminding them of home and of the larger purpose behind their service. Such details reveal the deeply human side of their experience, often overlooked in military history. Over time, their story became a bridge between cultures. Many Americans who had never known much about Native history suddenly learned about Navajo traditions through the code talkers. This helped break down stereotypes and opened conversations about indigenous identity, resilience, and contributions to the broader nation. Museums and exhibits dedicated to the code talkers often highlight not just their military role, but also their cultural context. Visitors learn about Navajo life, traditions, and the resilience of a people who survived centuries of hardship. In this way, the code talkers' legacy is not just about war, it's about survival and strength across generations. Hollywood's version of their story brought mixed reactions. While the film Wind Talkers introduced the idea to a wider audience, many felt it oversimplified or dramatized their experience. Real code talkers explained that their work wasn't about action-packed heroics, it was about discipline, precision, and trust. The quiet truth of their mission was far more powerful than any Hollywood script. In the 21st century, technology has made communication faster than ever. Yet the Navajo Code Talkers' legacy still matters. They proved that innovation doesn't always come from machines or algorithms. Sometimes the answers to our toughest problems lie in places we least expect, like an ancient language spoken in the deserts of the Southwest. The Navajo Nation today takes pride in honoring the Code Talkers. Schools teach their story, ceremonies remember their sacrifice, and families pass down the memory through oral tradition. For young Navajo people, their story is a reminder that their culture is powerful, valuable, and worth protecting. Every year, Code Talker Day is celebrated on August 14th in the Navajo Nation. It's a day filled with parades, speeches, and community gatherings. Veterans are honored, flags are raised, and stories are retold. The celebration is both patriotic and cultural, blending American pride with Navajo identity in a way that perfectly reflects who the Code Talkers were. It's also worth remembering that the Code Talkers weren't just voices on the radio, they were soldiers too. They carried rifles, faced danger, and fought alongside their comrades in some of the bloodiest battles of the war. Their courage wasn't limited to their role as communicators. They stood shoulder to shoulder with every Marine in combat. The unbreakable nature of the Navajo Code still amazes experts today. In an age where most codes can eventually be cracked with enough time and computing power, the Navajo system remains secure from start to finish. It stands as a testament to the brilliance of human ingenuity combined with cultural uniqueness. For the world, the Navajo Code Talkers offer a timeless lesson. Never underestimate the power of culture, language, and identity. What some may see as old-fashioned or irrelevant may actually hold the key to solving modern challenges. Their story is a reminder that every voice, every culture, and every heritage has value beyond measure. In the end, the Navajo Code Talkers were more than just soldiers. They were cultural guardians, innovators, and quiet heroes whose words carried the weight of victory. Their story continues to echo across time. It's not just as part of American history, but as a universal symbol of resilience, creativity, and the strength of human diversity. When you listen to recordings of the Navajo Code Talkers today, it's striking how natural it all sounds. To the untrained ear, it's just rapid Navajo conversation. But hidden within those words were maps, orders, and strategies that directed thousands of men. That ordinary-sounding speech carried extraordinary power, enough to shape entire battles in the Pacific. Some historians call the Code Talkers living encryption machines. Unlike the bulky devices of the time, they needed no electricity, no wires, no gears, just their minds. They could encode and decode on the spot faster and more accurately than any mechanical system. In many ways, they were ahead of the technology of their era. Yet, despite this brilliance, the Code Talkers themselves often remained humble. Interviews with surviving members show that most of them didn't think of themselves as heroes. They considered their actions simply part of their duty. That humility is perhaps one of the most endearing and inspiring parts of their story. The contrast between how they were treated during the war and after is stark. On the battlefield, they were vital, respected, and trusted. At home, they returned to communities still struggling with poverty and discrimination. That dual reality makes their story not just one of triumph, but also one of resilience in the face of hardship. Today, many Native youth draw strength from the Code Talkers' legacy. They see how their language, once suppressed, became a symbol of strength and protection. This motivates new generations to learn and preserve Navajo, not just as a piece of culture, but as a living reminder of resilience and pride. Educational programs across the U.S. now include the Code Talkers in history lessons. Teachers present their story as a reminder that history is more than presidents and generals. It's also about people whose unique skills changed the world. Students are often amazed that a language, rather than a weapon, could be such a decisive factor in war. The Code Talkers' success also shows how collaboration across cultures can achieve the impossible. The U.S. military, which once overlooked or dismissed Native communities, ended up relying on them for survival. This partnership became a quiet lesson about the value of inclusion, even in times of crisis. Some surviving Code Talkers shared their memories in books and oral histories. These accounts provide vivid glimpses into their lives. The sounds of battle, the weight of secrecy, and the relief of victory. Hearing their voices retell these moments adds a deeply human layer to the history, beyond statistics or timelines. One of the most touching aspects of their story is the recognition they finally received late in life. Standing in Washington, receiving medals from the president, many expressed joy not for themselves, but for their families and their people. They wanted the world to know that Navajo culture mattered, that it had helped win a global war. Monuments dedicated to the Code Talkers now stand in Arizona, New Mexico, and Washington, D.C. These sites are places of reflection, where visitors can honor their memory and consider the unlikely journey of a language from the deserts of the SCRH to the battlefields of the Pacific. The story also resonates beyond the United States. People in other countries see it as proof that small communities can influence global events. It inspires those who fight to preserve endangered languages, showing that every language holds unique wisdom and potential value. Military academies still study the Navajo Code Talkers, not to replicate their work, but to understand the creativity behind it. Their achievement wasn't just technical, it was imaginative, blending tradition with innovation. That kind of thinking remains just as important in today's world as it was during World War II. The Code Talkers also serve as a reminder of how fragile and precious cultural knowledge can be. Had the Navajo language disappeared under pressure from assimilation, the U.S. might have lost one of its greatest wartime advantages. Preserving language, therefore, isn't just about heritage, it can also be about survival. For the Navajo Nation, the Code Talkers embody the strength of their people. They represent the idea that no matter the hardships, culture and identity can endure. Their legacy continues to inspire pride and confidence within their communities, strengthening bonds between past and present. Visitors to Navajo lands often hear firsthand stories about the Code Talkers. Elders and family members share memories, keeping the history alive through storytelling. In this way, the tradition of oral history blends seamlessly with modern remembrance, ensuring the legacy is never forgotten. The Code Talkers' story is also deeply symbolic. In a war defined by machines, factories, and industrial might, the turning point came from something deeply human: language. That balance between modern warfare and ancient heritage makes their contribution unique in all of history. Even as technology advances, the Navajo Code Talkers remain relevant. Their story is retold not just for its historical value, but for the lessons it carries about respect, creativity, and unity. In classrooms, museums, and documentaries, their voices continue to echo. Ultimately, the Navajo Code Talkers didn't just confound the Axis. They reminded the world that power can come from the most unexpected places. Their language, shaped by centuries of culture, became the shield and sword of an army. That is a legacy no one can ever take away. And so, the story of the Navajo Code Talkers lives on. Not as a forgotten footnote, but as a proud chapter in world history. It shows us that courage has many forms, that heritage can be a source of strength, and that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can find ways to shine. Their voices carried victory once, and their echoes continue to inspire today.